The Vikings didn't conquer the north by brute force alone. They survived because they understood something modern builders still get wrong. In the coldest inhabited regions on Earth, where trees were scarce and firewood was life, Viking homes stayed warm through storms that would crush most modern cabins. No electricity, no furnaces, no imported materials. And at one point this method was quietly discouraged, then outright forbidden to teach, because it didn't fit the new idea of what a proper house was supposed to be. That alone should make you lean in. This isn't folklore. This is hard survival architecture. And if you care about old-world resilience, this is required knowledge. The Viking home was not a house, but a thermal system. What most people call a Viking longhouse was not designed to look impressive. It was designed to manage heat, moisture, and airflow in a brutal climate, where mistakes meant death. The structure worked because it treated the house as a living system, not a sealed box. Vikings understood that warmth wasn't just about generating heat. It was about keeping heat from escaping while letting moisture leave on its own terms. The walls were thick, not decorative thick, survival thick. Layers of stone, packed earth, turf, and sometimes sod stacked like a biological battery. Each layer had a job. Stone held mass. Earth provided insulation. Turf added trapped air and organic density. Wool and animal fibres filled gaps where modern builders would shove foam. Heat generated by bodies, animals, lamps and cooking stayed inside the mass of the walls and slowly radiated back inward. The house didn't need to be constantly heated. It remembered warmth. Why soil was the secret weapon no one talks about. The most important material in Viking homes was dirt, not mud, proper layered soil. Earth has an absurdly high thermal mass. When protected from direct wind and precipitation, it absorbs heat and releases it slowly over time. Vikings built their homes partially into the ground, using the planet itself as insulation. Below the frost line, temperature barely changes year-round. That alone stabilized interior conditions. This wasn't accidental. These homes were oriented carefully. Entrances were minimized and shielded. Wind-facing walls were reinforced. The rooflines stayed low to reduce exposure. Cold air sank away from sleeping platforms, while warm air stayed where people lived. Even livestock placement mattered. Animals were sometimes housed in adjoining sections, contributing body heat while being separated enough to control moisture. Modern building codes later rejected this approach because it didn't look civilized. Earth contact walls scared officials who didn't understand them. By the 1800s, as centralized governments pushed standardized housing across northern regions, these homes were labeled unhealthy, primitive, or unsanitary. Settlers were told to adopt timber frame houses that leaked heat and required endless fuel. The irony is painful. The turf roof was not a roof, but a climate regulator. A Viking roof wasn't there to keep rain out alone. It was there to control temperature and humidity. Layers of birch bark acted as waterproofing long before plastic membranes existed. On top of that came thick sod. Grass grew on the roof, its roots locking everything together. This living layer insulated against heat loss in winter and heat gain in summer. Snow piled on top, adding even more insulation. Here's the part modern builders miss. The roof breathed. Moisture moved slowly outward instead of being trapped. Condensation didn't rot the structure because it wasn't sealed with vapor barriers that fight physics. Moisture migration was expected and managed, not feared. This is why these homes lasted generations. Wood rot was minimized. Mold was rare. The house dried itself naturally. Why Viking homes recycled condensation instead of trapping it. Modern insulation traps moisture, then pretends it doesn't exist. Vikings knew better. Warm air holds moisture. When it hits a cold surface, it condenses. Instead of sealing everything tight, Viking homes allowed condensation to form in controlled zones within the wall layers. That moisture then released heat as it changed state, warming the surrounding material before slowly evaporating outward. This meant the walls themselves contributed to heating. Subtle but constant. It's thermodynamics, not magic. That understanding was lost when industrial materials took over. During World War II, mass housing prioritized speed and standardization. Thermal mass and moisture management were sacrificed for thin walls and artificial heating. Fuel was cheap. Knowledge was not. Why authorities discouraged teaching this system? By the 19th century, governments wanted uniformity. Taxable, inspectable, code-compliant buildings. Earth-sheltered homes didn't fit the model. They were hard to regulate, hard to standardize, hard to monetize, so they were framed as outdated and unsafe. Builders were trained out of these techniques. In some regions, settlers were explicitly told not to replicate old turf and earth designs. This wasn't a conspiracy, it was bureaucratic convenience. But the result was the same. A hyper-efficient housing system vanished from common knowledge. How this ancient system outperforms modern insulated homes. Here's the uncomfortable truth. A properly built Viking-style earth home can outperform many modern houses in cold climates with a fraction of the energy input. Thick mass walls don't lose heat quickly. Ground coupling stabilizes temperature. Breathable materials prevent moisture damage. Fire use becomes supplemental, not constant. Modern homes, often rely on machines to fix design flaws. But Viking homes, well, they avoided those flaws entirely. Now, the question is, how do we apply this knowledge today without, having to live exactly like a Viking? You don't need to wear wool tunics or build with stone tools, of course. The principles, though, translate quite cleanly into modern off-grid and low-energy builds. Start with earth contact. Even partial berming against your walls can dramatically reduce heat loss. Use soil strategically, not just as fill, but as insulation and mass. Next, prioritize thickness over synthetic insulation alone. Combine dense materials with, say, trapped air layers. Think in terms of heat storage, not just R value. Design airflow intentionally. High and low ventilation points allow moisture to move without mechanical systems. Avoid plastic vapor barriers when breathable alternatives exist, and use natural fibers where possible. Wool, honestly, still outperforms many modern insulators in moisture handling. Roof design, it really does matter. A green roof isn't just for looks, it's functional, absolutely. Even a shallow soil layer, believe it or not, changes thermal behavior drastically. Snow is not your enemy, it's insulation. Inside, zone your living space. Sleep higher, keep entrances tight. Use mass near heat sources to store warmth. A stone hearth surrounded by dense material radiates long after the fire dies. This isn't nostalgia, this is engineering. Why does this matter for survivalists and serious historians? Well, this knowledge isn't about reenactment. It's about resilience. Fuel shortages, grid failures, remote living, climate extremes. Viking architecture solved problems we are, frankly, relearning under pressure. The old world didn't survive because it was primitive. It survived because it paid attention. If you build, study, or prep without understanding thermal mass and moisture flow, you're missing a core skill. The Vikings mastered it centuries ago. Then, well, we forgot it on purpose. If this kind of buried history matters to you, if you want knowledge that actually keeps you warm and alive, subscribe to Old World Prep. Share this with someone who still thinks survival is about gadgets instead of systems. And stay sharp.